Hi, my name is Myung. I am a gay Korean adoptee, and this is my video out. So I grew up in upstate New York, like 20-ish minutes outside of Albany, in this really small town, and it's like a pretty rural area. It's like one of those places where when you go back to it after you leave, you kind of like ask yourself, what did I do for 18 years of my life up here? But yeah, my family's still up there, and it's like nice because it's only 3 hours away, so it's like easy to go back up. But yeah, I was probably like one of 3 people of color in my school. One of like 2 or 3 gay people that I knew of in my school as well. Yeah, so it's really kind of interesting. I mean, I feel like I personally dealt more with racism than I did with homophobia, interestingly enough. I think the racism was much more like kind of like upfront because it's like obvious that I'm not white. But the homophobia aspect, I think, was much more like probably behind closed doors. People probably sort of had more conversations about it when I like not to my face. I wasn't really in the same grade as the other people that I knew that were people of color, and so I didn't really interact with them. And then you have those whole identity issues of like forgetting that you're not white, that whole kind of stuff. I'm also adopted as well, so there's like this whole extra layer of that. I grew up with a white family, and then you're kind of like in a white town, in a white school, and so it becomes very confusing when you're growing up. Yeah. So my parents put me in these like Korean culture camps for adoptees, and I pretty much got to like hang out with those other adoptees like a few times, like once a year. And then luckily one of my best friends was also adopted, and he lived he didn't go to my school, but he lived like 10 minutes away from us maybe, and so I got to like hang out with him. So I felt like that was like kind of at the time that was like enough for me, because I didn't really recognize what it was doing to my self-awareness, but luckily I came here to the city in college, and I met a lot of other people and diversified. Well, I think nowadays it's nice because of things like Facebook, and there's a lot more resources for adoptees now, so it's easier to find groups of adoptees, or like different support groups, and just easily online. Whether or not you can hang out with these people in person is one thing, just because I feel like most adoptees that I know, our stories are very similar, and that everybody's sort of spread out, and everybody tends to grow up in an area that's predominantly white, and they're generally part of like transracial, transnational families. So it's not super easy, I think, to meet in person, but there's a lot of different organizations that allow adoptees to meet each other, and whether it's through like online or just through like different conferences and things like that. So I would say seek those out, because I didn't have those when I was growing up beyond like the summer camp, but like Facebook wasn't really around until I came to college, and so it was much more segmented in the sense that like once a year I really got to learn about that part of my identity, and then the rest of the year it sort of had to take a back seat. I was very fortunate that my parents initially when I came out to them, they were a little, I think they were a little afraid for my health specifically, just because my parents are a little bit older. They, to them, like, the LGBTQ community was, the AIDS crisis. So their first thought was, like, we don't want you being sick, like getting sick. And through time, they realized that, that's not the, the death sentence for every, queer person in the world. And now they're incredibly supportive. I also think I'm one of those people that sort of just does what he wants anyway. So they kind of didn't have a choice but to just sort of like, accept me. I feel very privileged to be able to say that, but I was very fortunate that they were so supportive. The first people that I came out to were my best friends in high school, and I think I came out to them in 9th grade. I came out in 10th grade to my parents, but in 9th grade, I remember they kind of were like coercing me into coming out. And there was this one other guy in our group of friends. It was like literally a group of like 10 girls and then 2 guys, and like myself included. And I remember I was like on the phone with like 2 of my friends were like hanging out at somebody's house, and they called me and I'm like, it would just be so great if you could come out. And I was like, what? No, I'm not gay. And they're like, okay, but if you were, we have other friends that are gay, so like you wouldn't be alone, and like we would support you. And I was like, who is this other person? And I just look back at it now and I'm like, how did I not know that the only other guy in our group of friends was also gay? I was like, what? Like, was my gay hair like that horrible? Like, was I that blind? So once I kind of like figured it out, I was like, oh wow. And it made it a lot easier for me to come out. Yeah. I don't really know if I knew at like a specific time. I feel like for me it was like sort of gradual, but there were like all those, everybody has those stories about like all those different signs. Apparently when I was like really young, my sister and I were like watching some movie, and I like just kind of in that sort of like innocent kind of no filter youthfulness, I was like, oh, I think if I ever get married, it would be to a guy. And my sister was like, okay. My sister's older, and she was sort of like, okay, well, there we go. And I think that sort of just, it was never really spoken about until like years later when I actually kind of came out. And she's like, well, I always kind of knew. But I remember like there was this guy on my soccer team. I did one of those like intramural kind of like youth soccer leagues, and I just remember like the first time, like after a game, you like took his shirt off, and I was like, and I just remember like being like so infatuated with him, and I couldn't figure out why. And I think that was probably, one of the other like the first times that I started like really thinking that I was like attracted to guys instead of girls. And also I was super attracted to the Green Ranger, so, from Power Rangers, so that was, I always secretly wished I was Kimberly, so that was probably another sign. Comparatively to other people, my coming out story is, like, not dramatic, it's not, mine was like kind of a cakewalk, because I think there, I look back on it, and I certainly experienced the lead up to it was, a ton of fear. Like, I didn't think I was going to come out until after college. So, the actual moment of coming out was relatively painless. My parents were still a little bit kind of like, let's not like really talk about it so much. but the lead up to it was still incredibly stressful, and like I really honestly didn't think that I would come out until after I graduated college and I was self-sufficient, so that way if my parents did, you know, if they didn't agree with it and kind of disowned me, I was like, well, you know, then that's your choice, and I'll have, you know, like I have my life, and I don't need to like depend on you anymore. So I had this whole, you know, naive plan kind of worked out in my brain, and then like in 10th grade I just like got like really upset for some reason. I must have been like talking to some guy, and like I don't think it was like working out or something, and I was just like really depressed and kind of brooding about it. And obviously like my parents are very sensitive, so they're always trying to like make sure that like my sister and I are okay, and they're like, well, what's wrong? And you know, I'm kind of unwilling to tell them because it obviously also outs me, but I think I just I kind of went past the point of no return and just kind of blurted it out at some point. And yeah, so again, like generally speaking, I think I had a relatively simple coming out process, but you know, I definitely experienced that, you know, weight that comes before it. Yeah. I think being adopted, there is this sort of, I think a lot of adoptees tend to have this extra layer of fear of rejection because your whole life has sort of been started because of, you know, like through loss. You know, your birth parents, for one reason or another, there's a multitude of reasons why people are put up for adoption, you know, whether it's willingly or unwillingly. So, you know, adoptees, like our beginnings sort of come from this idea that we were rejected from our families or our country of origin. And so I think when it came to coming out, there was that extra level of, you know, just like not wanting to do anything to disappoint the family that took me in, or, you know, the family that raised me. So, because, you know, you never really want to disappoint your family, so yeah.
If you could say anything to your family now that you're out and you know how they feel, no inhibitions, this doesn't have to be included, but just like allow yourself to say whatever you can say to them. What would you say?
I would say thank you for giving yourself and myself time to work through, you know, like me coming out. And you know, I think even when parents don't, there are so many people that, you know, might consider themselves very open and liberal people, but still when if their child comes out as queer, it's still kind of a shock to them. Or, you know, I think parents tend to have an idea of what they think their child's life is going to be like, so anything that's a little different from anything that kind of, you know, skews off of that path is still sort of shocking. So I would just say thank you to them for having readjusted their idea of who I was, because, you know, I'm the one that gets to define what that is, and I think it takes a lot for people to, just in general, to sort of, you know, relearn what they think that they already know. I like that I have different spaces that I can kind of pond hop, you know, in and out of. You know, I'm Korean, so I have my Korean friends, but, you know, I grew up with this, like, super white family in upstate New York, so I got all of my friends like back at home and my family. I'm adopted, so I have my adoptee friends. I'm queer, so I can hang out with like all of my, you know, queer friends as well. And then I have my queer adoptee friends, and then I have, you know, my like adopted friends that are, you know, maybe from like different nationalities. So it's I like that I'm able to kind of have all these different groups of people that I can identify with, and it's also nice being able to kind of merge them together at different points, because I think it's never good when people kind of, you know, stick too close to themselves, and yeah, I like being able to kind of allow other people to meet people that are different from them as well. Hi, my name is Myung, and I am an animator and tech designer here in New York City. I am 30 years old, and that's the best that I can
That's all you
describe
want
myself.
us to tell us.
That's all I am.
Great. All right, we'll see you later.
Great, bye.